for words, and the entire room fell silent. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me, the man they'd long dismissed, the forgotten son, the quiet one, the shadow standing in the back of every boardroom. I rose from my seat in the shareholder meeting of Pulse Nova Biotech. The air in the room was thick with anticipation. My father, Richard Cooper, stood frozen at the podium, eyes narrowing as if trying to scorch me with just his stare. He wore his power like an expensive suit, but right now it was slipping off him. And beside him, Ethan, my younger brother, the golden boy, flinched. His arrogant smile wavered. I opened the dossier in my hands. 10 years of silence turned into weapons. Every reckless decision Ethan made, every financial misstep, every ignored warning. The pages weren't just paper. They were proof. Of my patience, of my pain, of my plan. For a decade, I stayed quiet. I played the long game. I was the ghost in the system, the man in the corner cubicle, the Harvard graduate treated like an intern, while my brother partied through promotions and wore the title of heir like it was birthright. But today was different. Today, I wasn't the outsider. I was the storm knocking down the front door. The room watched as I spoke, calm, composed, but burning inside. They didn't know about the night my father stood over me, drunk, and snarled, "You're not my son." They didn't know my mother died in a car crash while flying out to visit me, and how my father looked me in the eye and said, "She'd still be alive if it weren't for you." I never forgot those words. I never forgave them. And now I was here, standing at the helm of the company I helped save, while the very men who tried to erase me were about to be erased from power. "You built an empire, Dad," I said quietly, "but I'm the one who made it worth something. I was born into a house made of glass, breathtaking from the outside, but always on the verge of shattering from within." The Cooper estate in the Hamptons sat on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic, waves crashing below like distant applause for a family that wore perfection like a designer suit. My father, Richard Cooper, founder of Pulse Nova Biotech, was a legend in boardrooms and a ghost at home. A man carved from ambition, steel-eyed and stone-hearted. To the world, he was the future of American healthcare innovation. To me, he was a storm I couldn't outrun. From the moment I could walk, I understood that I wasn't the son he wanted. I remember one night when I was 6. The house was glowing with lights, a fundraiser gala for one of his cancer research initiatives. Everyone who mattered in New York's biotech scene was there. I wasn't supposed to be seen, let alone heard, but I snuck out of my room, drawn by the music and laughter I rarely experienced firsthand. I hid behind a marble pillar near the main hall, watching my younger brother Ethan, 4 years old then, golden-haired and effortlessly charming, being paraded around like a royal heir. He laughed as our father lifted him up and whispered something in his ear that made them both smile. I couldn't hear the words, but I could feel their meaning deep in my bones. This is the son I chose. Later that night, when most guests had left and my mother, Grace, was helping the caterers clean up, I walked into my father's study holding a crayon drawing I'd spent the day working on. It was a sketch of our family, stick figures, childish and crooked, but it was us. I had drawn him tall, smiling. I wanted him to see himself the way I wished he could be. He looked at the drawing, then at me, and something dark flickered in his eyes. "What is this?" he asked coldly. "It's us," I said, my voice trembling but hopeful. A pause, then a scoff. "You think a stupid drawing is going to make me proud of you?" he said, before crumpling the paper and tossing it into the fireplace. The flames took it like they took everything else in that house. Quietly, efficiently, without remorse. I ran out of the room, heart pounding. I didn't cry. Not yet. I didn't want to give him that. But I found my mother in the kitchen, and when she opened her arms, I collapsed into her. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing the hair from my forehead. "He doesn't know how to love the right way. But I do, and I love you more than anything." She always said that. I love you more than anything. It was the only anchor I had. But even anchors drift when the storm is strong enough. Ethan, even at a young age, knew he was the chosen one. He used it like a weapon. When I got straight A's, he got a new Xbox. When I won the regional science fair, he got a trip to Tokyo. My father never attended my awards ceremonies. Said he was busy running a billion-dollar company. The irony? I was the one who'd eventually make it a $1 billion company. But back then, I was just the other son. By the time I turned 13, Ethan had started calling me charity case under his breath. He'd trip me in the hallway, mock the way I dressed, rip pages out of my textbooks when no one was looking. Once he laughed when I fell off my bike and scraped my knee open. I looked up, hoping he'd help. He just said, "Maybe if Dad liked you more, you'd have better balance." My mother tried to mediate. She always tried. But Ethan had my father's protection. That made him untouchable. Then came the day that sealed the curse. It was Ethan's 9th birthday. An extravagant garden party with ice sculptures, circus performers, and gourmet cupcakes flown in from France. I was assigned watch duty because the event planner said Ethan needed a responsible older sibling nearby. Mid-party, Ethan hurled a cupcake at the CFO of my father's company, splattering frosting across the man's $1,000 suit. Everyone froze. Ethan laughed, but my father didn't yell at him. He turned to me instead. In front of 24 guests, he grabbed my arm and snarled, "Why didn't you stop him? Are you that useless?" Then he slapped me. Hard. Right in front of everyone. No one moved. No one spoke. Except my mother. She rushed forward, wrapped herself around me, and shouted at him like I'd never heard before. But the damage was done. Not to my face, but to my soul. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the ocean beyond our estate walls. My cheeks still stung. My heart ached, but something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to earn my place by begging for it. I was going to take it whether they gave it to me or not. If our house was a kingdom, then Ethan was its crown prince, loved, spoiled, and armored by favoritism. And I was the forgotten shadow lingering just outside the light. As we got older, the differences between us became more than just emotional. They were systemic. Ethan was 4 years younger, but miles ahead in how the world treated him. My father bought him a mini yacht on his 10th birthday. Me? I got a pat on the back for getting into the top percentile in my state math exams. Not for Dad, of course, for my mother. She always cheered the loudest for the things he never even noticed. Ethan had the same icy blue eyes as my father, the same angular jawline, the same smirk that said, "I don't need to try. I already own this world." He was athletic, charming, and painfully aware of it. Teachers adored him. Girls swooned over him. And worst of all, my father beamed with pride whenever Ethan so much as breathed near success. But Ethan was reckless. He was the kind of boy who thrived on attention, even if it came from chaos. He once crashed my father's vintage Porsche into a tennis court wall, tried to show off to a girl. He blamed the brakes. Dad believed him and replaced the car the next week. Meanwhile, I was working part-time tutoring math to save for used laptop. There was a night I'll never forget. One of those family dinners where the air was thick with tension, yet everyone pretended everything was perfect. We sat around the table, my father at the head, sipping his whiskey like it was holy water, Ethan on his right, scrolling through his phone mid-meal, me on the left, silent as always. "I'm thinking of appointing Ethan as junior board observer next quarter," my father said casually, cutting into his steak. I looked up, fork frozen midair. "He's 16. So, my father snapped, not even glancing at me. "He understands branding. He has a sense of leadership." "Leadership?" I asked, stunned. "He cut school last week to fly to Miami with his friends." Ethan grinned without shame. "It was for a networking event." My father chuckled, actually chuckled. "That's initiative. Something you could learn from." It was then I realized it didn't matter what I did. I could get into every Ivy League in the country. I could build a rocket to Mars. It would never be enough to match Ethan's mediocrity. My mother tried to keep things balanced. She made Ethan do chores when my father wasn't around. She encouraged him to study, to respect boundaries, to be better. But Ethan knew he didn't have to listen, and that made him cruel. When he was 14, he found a notebook I kept, filled with sketches and startup ideas. Concepts for AI-based medical tools, inventory optimization systems for hospitals, plans I dreamed of pitching one day. He took it to school and read passages out loud during lunch in front of his friends. "Listen to this," he mocked, laughing. "Pulse Nova 2.0? Oh man, my brother's planning a coup." I found a notebook later that day, Pages torn, coffee spilled across diagrams, notes shredded. My hands trembled as I picked it up. When I confronted him, he just shrugged. "You take yourself too seriously," he said. "No one cares about your nerd crap." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my room, staring at the damaged pages, and I realized something. Ethan wasn't just entitled. He was dangerous. And worse, my father's blind love had made him believe he was untouchable. By the time I was a senior in high school, Ethan had already been featured in a Forbes Teens in Tech article, an internship he barely showed up for, arranged by my father's connections. Meanwhile, I spent weekends in libraries, preparing for SATs, refining essays, crafting a Harvard application that felt like my only shot at freedom. When I told my father I was applying, he scoffed. "Don't aim too high," he said. "It's better to be a big fish in a small pond than to drown in the ocean." Ethan chimed in. "If you get into Harvard, I'll tattoo your name on my back." I forced a smile, but inside, I felt a storm brewing. I wasn't trying to impress them anymore. I was trying to escape them. And I didn't just want to leave. I wanted to build a future where they couldn't touch me, couldn't belittle me, and couldn't rewrite the story of who I was. I just didn't know then that my real battle with Ethan was only beginning. I still remember the cold ring of the phone call, the kind that rewires your reality forever. I was 19 in my second year at Harvard. It was early April in Cambridge, the kind of day when the trees flirt with bloom and the sky teases warmth but never delivers. I was in the library, poring over midterm notes, trying to stay ahead of the curve. I just started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was building something of my own, far away from the toxic echo of the Cooper name. Then my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but I did. "Mr. Cooper," a trembling voice said on the other end. "This is Cynthia. I'm a friend of your mother's. Something's happened." My heart stuttered. Time slowed. The hum of the fluorescent lights above became deafening. She was in a plane crash. No survivors. She had been flying to surprise me for spring break. A quick trip from New York to Boston in a private jet. A gift, apparently, from my father to make up for missing too many birthdays. I dropped the phone. I don't remember screaming. I don't even remember running. Only that I was suddenly outside, in the cold wind, sobbing so violently I couldn't breathe. The world blurred into streaks of color and sound. My mother, Grace, was gone. Just like that. She was the only person who had ever made me believe I was worth something. The only one who saw the real me beneath the pain. And now she was gone, and I never got to say goodbye. I flew back to New York that night, my body present but my soul detached, floating somewhere above the skyline. While I walked into the house, my father was sitting in the living room, cradling a whiskey glass like it was his only anchor. His eyes were bloodshot, but not from crying. No, Richard Cooper didn't cry. He drank his grief down like medicine and let the bitterness settle in his bones. Ethan stood in the corner, arms crossed, jaw clenched. He didn't look at me. No one said a word. No embrace. No condolences. Just silence. Until my father finally broke it. "If you hadn't asked her to visit," he muttered without looking at me, "she'd still be alive." The words hit me harder than any slap he'd ever given. It wasn't enough that I lost her. He needed me to carry the guilt, too. I said nothing. Just walked upstairs, collapsed on my childhood bed, and cried until dawn. The funeral was a grand production. Of course it was. Black limos, a marble chapel, flower arrangements that cost more than tuition. My father shook hands with business partners like he was attending a gala, while I stood beside her casket, lost. Ethan showed up halfway through the service, nodded at a few people, then left early with his friends to go to some party in Manhattan. I stayed until the very end. I touched her casket, whispered all the things I never got to say. "Thank you. I'm sorry. I love you." That was the day I became an orphan, even though my father was still alive. After the funeral, I returned to Harvard, but I was no longer the same student, the same person. Something inside me had broken, but in that breaking, I found resolve. My mother's death couldn't be in vain. I wouldn't let that happen. I would finish what she believed in. I would rise, not just to succeed, but to make sure no one ever dismissed me again. The pain became fuel. I buried myself in my studies. I graduated with near-perfect grades, earned a place in the master's program, and stopped calling home. Richard never once checked in. Ethan sent a one-line text, "Sorry about Mom. Hope school's okay." That was it. I kept all of my mother's letters in a wooden box beside my desk. I read them on the nights when the loneliness was too heavy. In one, she wrote, "No matter how far you go, Daniel, I will always be beside you. You're my hope, not just for our family, but for the world." Those words lit a fire in me no one could extinguish. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about becoming the man she believed I could be. But one day, that path would lead me back to the place I feared most. The place where the boy called useless would return not as a son, but as a threat. I returned to New York on a sweltering August afternoon. Thick air, sticky pavement, and a sky that pressed down like a weight on my shoulders. It had been nearly 5 years since I'd set foot inside Pulse Nova Biotech's towering headquarters in Midtown Manhattan. The last time I visited, I was a high school kid trailing behind my father, silent and invisible. Now I was 24, holding a master's degree from Harvard and carrying a quiet fire in my chest. The call came a week before graduation. No congratulations. No acknowledgement. Just, "The company needs people. Come back if you want to be useful." The voice was unmistakable. Richard Cooper. Still cold. Still commanding. Part of me wanted to say no. To cut all ties. To build my life from scratch, far from the shadows that had nearly consumed me. But I couldn't. Not yet. Because unfinished business doesn't stay buried. It waits. So I packed a suitcase and boarded a flight home. Not as the obedient son, but as something else entirely. A silent observer with a long memory and a plan. Pulse Nova's glass tower gleamed in the sunlight, the steel logo embedded into the marble wall outside like a seal of power. But beneath the shine, I could feel the cracks. Inside, the lobby was grand, double-height ceilings, abstract sculptures, polished floors that reflected your flaws back at you. I stepped up to the reception desk. "Name?" the assistant asked. "Daniel Cooper," I said. "I'm starting today." Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh, you're Mr. Cooper's son?" Something like that. She gave a nervous smile and handed me a temporary badge. "Product development, 17th floor," she said. "You'll be reporting to Director Vaughn." Product development. An entry-level position. So that's how my father welcomed me home. I rode the elevator in silence, flanked by executives chatting about IPO prospects and global licensing strategies. None of them paid attention to me. I was just another employee. But that was the advantage, wasn't it? No one watches the invisible man. On the 17th floor, I found my desk, small, wedged in the far corner between a file cabinet and the window. There were no welcome gifts, no team lunch, no "we're excited to have you." Just a stack of documents and a cold nod from the department head. "Let's see if Harvard teaches real-world competence," he said before walking away. I said nothing, because competence wasn't what I came to prove. I spent my days analyzing diagnostic device data, preparing reports no one read, running simulations that got buried under flashier marketing campaigns. But I didn't complain. I listened. I learned. I stayed late. I memorized the company's supply chains, its vendor contracts, its R&D pipeline. I saw the gaps, products rushed to market, decisions driven by ego instead of need. And I saw Ethan. He breezed in every day around 10:30, dressed like a GQ cover model, with a titanium MacBook he barely opened. My brother had been handed the title of Director of Strategy, a position he treated like a social media role. One day, I passed him in the corridor. Well, he said with that familiar smirk. "If it isn't the prodigal intern." I forced a smile. "Just doing my job. You always were good at staying in your lane." He walked off laughing, not realizing I wasn't in a lane. I was in position. My father hadn't changed either. Still ruled the boardroom like a warlord. Still spoke over everyone, especially me. During a quarterly review, I suggested a modest upgrade to a diagnostic unit's firmware that could reduce patient scan errors by 8%. He cut me off mid-sentence. "Stick to your desk, Daniel," he snapped. "This isn't a classroom." Ethan laughed. Others stared at their papers. I said nothing, but I felt something shift. Not rage. Not shame. Clarity. They still saw the boy. but the man was already building something they couldn't see yet. Over the next few months, I started having lunch with the engineers. I remembered their names, asked about their ideas, listened more than I spoke. One of them, Maria Reynolds, had been with the company for a decade. Brilliant, underappreciated, tired of Ethan's golden boy antics. "You actually care about the work," she said one afternoon. "Someone has to," I replied. We looked out the window, the city skyline glittering like promise. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't just back. I was home, but this time I didn't come to belong. I came to change everything. It started with a phone call and a name I never wanted to hear again. "Mr. Cooper," the voice said, "this is St. Vincent's Hospital. Your father's been admitted, mild heart attack. We need an immediate blood relative for transfusion. Are you available to donate?" For a moment, I froze. I hadn't seen him in days, hadn't spoken to him outside of sterile meeting rooms in months. Part of me wanted to hang up, to let the man who had bruised my childhood fade into the background like he always made me. But something in me wouldn't let go. Duty? Habit? Or maybe a trace of my mother's voice whispering, "You're not like him." I grabbed my keys and drove through the chaos of Manhattan traffic like I was chasing time. The sun had dipped low by the time I reached the ER. Inside, the smell of antiseptic and anxiety lingered in the air. Nurses moved quickly. Beeping monitors echoed in sterile corridors. I found him lying in a hospital bed, pale but conscious. Tubes snaked from his arms. His skin looked thinner, his face sunken, less like the tyrant I remembered, more like a man cracked open by age. Ethan sat slouched in the corner, scrolling through his phone, thumbs moving faster than thought. "You made it," he muttered without looking up. "I'll donate," I told the attending nurse. They ran a routine blood type match. 10 minutes later, the doctor came back with a look I'll never forget, confused, cautious. "Mr. Cooper," he said gently, "you're B positive, but your father is type O. Genetically, that's not possible. You can't be his biological son." The words didn't register at first. They hovered in the air like a fog, waiting for me to inhale them. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice flat. The doctor hesitated. "It's medically impossible for you to be his child." I walked out of the hospital in a daze, heart pounding, memories crashing like waves. "You're not my son." I thought it was just cruelty, drunken spite. But now it made sense. He knew. He had always known. Was that why he hated me? I went home and opened the wooden box I'd kept for years, the one with my mother's letters. My hands trembled as I flipped through them, searching for answers in the cursive loops of her handwriting. None came. Just warmth, love, hope, and silence. The next morning, I started digging. I called a friend from Harvard, Rachel, now a corporate attorney. I asked for help accessing public records, family documents. I hired a private investigator named Paul to look into anything that might connect the dots. It took weeks. Every night, I worked my day job at Pulse Nova like nothing was wrong. But every evening, I drowned in documents and whispered theories. Then one day, Paul called. "I found something," he said. "You're not going to like it." He emailed me a scanned file, an old hospital record from 1999. My mother had been admitted to a clinic in upstate New York just months before I was born. Her injuries were severe. The file read, "Blunt force trauma. Sexual assault suspected. No charges filed. Patient declined to name suspects." My throat tightened as I read the line again. Assault. She never told anyone. Never pressed charges. Never even spoke of it. And yet, she carried me anyway. Raised me with love. Protected me from a monster who never once called me son. She looked into my eyes every day and said, "You are my hope." Even now, she never stopped being my mother. That night, I stood outside the Cooper estate in the Hamptons. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Less like a palace, more like a prison wrapped in wealth. I walked inside. My father was sitting by the fireplace, whiskey in hand, as if nothing had happened. "I'm not your biological son," I said calmly. He didn't flinch. He just stared into the fire. "You already knew, didn't you?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Elizabeth wanted it kept quiet. She didn't want you to grow up feeling like a mistake." Was I? I asked, more for myself than him. He looked up, his eyes hollow. "You were never mine, but she loved you like you were. Then he turned back to his glass and said nothing more. I left without another word. The truth didn't hurt like I thought it would. It explained everything. The beatings, the silence, the slaps in public, the "you'll never be one of us" looks, the favoritism, the name-calling. I wasn't a Cooper by blood, but I wasn't a mistake either. I was my mother's son, and that was the only bloodline I needed. After the night I confronted my father, something inside me hardened, like steel that had been tempered by fire too many times to ever bend again. I didn't quit Pulse Nova Biotech. I didn't storm out or go public or try to reclaim some fractured identity. Instead, I returned to my small corner desk on the 17th floor like nothing had changed. Because now I understood something vital. The greatest revolutions don't start with shouts. They start in silence. While my father nursed his bruised pride and Ethan posed for press releases, I got to work. I buried myself in the company, its contracts, its patents, its organizational weaknesses. Every night, after the office emptied, I stayed late and mapped the pulse of the entire operation. I read the fine print of every vendor deal. I cross-reference profit margins with launch calendars. I didn't just know the company. I became its ghost. Maria Reynolds, the lead engineer I'd quietly befriended, noticed my hours, my hunger, my silence. One night, she knocked on my office door. It was nearly 10 p.m. The floor was dark, save for our two screens glowing in the quiet. "You live here now?" she asked, smirking. I shrugged. "Less noise here." She stepped in, crossed her arms. "You've been digging." I didn't respond. "I know things aren't right at the top," she said. "Ethan's blowing millions on vanity projects, and no one holds him accountable. But you," she paused. "You're watching, planning, aren't you?" I met her eyes. I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. "I'm tired, Daniel," she whispered. "Tired of watching this company rot under incompetence. If you ever decide to do something about it, I'd follow you." That moment changed everything. Maria wasn't just smart. She had respect. Years of loyalty from engineers, R&D leads, mid-tier managers. If she was with me, others could be too. I didn't need a public uprising. I needed quiet alliances. Over the next 6 months, I nurtured them. I had lunch with logistics supervisors. I fixed bugs for the junior developers. I showed up unannounced to late-night hardware tests and complimented overlooked interns on smart code snippets. Slowly, discreetly, I built a shadow network of people who believed in more than the name Cooper. I also reconnected with someone outside the company, Jonathan Reed, an investor I met through a classmate at Harvard. He was sharp, seasoned, and had a particular interest in medtech disruption. We grabbed coffee in downtown Manhattan. "You've changed," he said, studying me. "I had to," I replied. "And now?" he asked. "I'm ready to change something else," I said. "Pulse Nova is rotting from the top. I'm not asking for a takeover yet. I'm asking for leverage. Quiet leverage." He leaned back, smiled. "Shares?" he asked. I nodded. "Discreet. Through shell companies. I'll tip you when we're about to launch new products. You invest. Slowly. No sudden moves. And what do you want in return?" he said. "When the time comes, I want a vote." He chuckled. "You're playing chess with a king who doesn't even realize the game started." I smiled. "That's the point." Jonathan agreed. He began accumulating small stakes in Pulse Nova through intermediaries. I arranged it so that no single move looked suspicious, but the sum of them meant power, influence, leverage. Meanwhile, Ethan descended further into his role as the prodigal fool. He hosted lavish parties under the Pulse Nova brand, posted shirtless photos from Dubai while the board reviewed quarterly losses, and approved a $5 million ad campaign based entirely on a concept pitched by a fashion influencer he was dating. I documented everything. I compiled every reckless decision, every leaked memo, every conflict of interest. I backed up files. I stored encrypted evidence in off-site servers. I wasn't going to go to war without ammunition. But even as I built this rebellion, I never stopped thinking about my mother. I kept her letters near me, one folded into the back cover of my notebook, another tucked in the drawer beside my badge. I'd reread them during the long nights, when ambition started to feel like vengeance, and I wondered if I was losing myself. "You are not who they say you are, Daniel. You are more. Be the man you needed when you were a boy. I wasn't doing this for revenge. Not entirely. I was doing it for every child who had ever been made to feel small. For every brilliant mind overlooked because of nepotism. For every engineer silenced by politics. For every whisper in the halls of Pulse Nova that said, if only someone would fix this place. I would be that someone, but I would not knock down the doors. I would build a new house, brick by quiet brick, until one day, when they least expected it. I don't know. If power reveals character, then Pulse Nova's fall under Ethan was a mirror held up to his soul, and there wasn't much to see. He strutted through the office halls like a peacock in tailored suits, late to every meeting, early to every rooftop cocktail. My father, Richard, still clung to the fantasy that Ethan would grow into a titan, but all Ethan grew was the expense report. The tipping point came in the form of a disastrous marketing deal. It started innocently enough. A flashy rebranding campaign pitched by a boutique firm based out of LA. Ethan, ever eager to be the visionary, signed a $10 million contract with them without consulting R&D or legal. Their idea? Pulse Nova's flagship AI diagnostics device rebranded as HealthWiz. Yes, HealthWiz, complete with neon billboards, influencer partnerships, and even a commercial starring an aging pop singer in a lab coat. It wasn't just embarrassing, it was offensive to the serious work we were doing. I warned the team in product development. This is going to backfire, I told Maria one night. No hospital is going to buy AI cancer diagnostics from a brand that sounds like a fitness app. She nodded grimly. But he won't listen. And your father, he's too far gone to care. The campaign launched. Within weeks, 3 major hospital networks pulled their contracts, citing concerns over brand reliability. Investors began whispering. Earnings projections dipped. And for the first time, Richard Cooper looked nervous in the boardroom. And Ethan? He shrugged it off. We're modernizing the brand, he told the board. Healthcare is changing. People want personality. That week, he flew to Ibiza. I had never seen our staff so demoralized. Engineers who once poured themselves into breakthrough innovations now spent mornings checking job listings. Product managers were updating resumes during lunch breaks. One afternoon, Maria pulled me aside. He's killing this company, she said quietly. And your father's letting him do it. That's when I knew. It wasn't enough to build alliances. I had to expose the rot, not just to employees, but to shareholders, to the very people my father still believed were loyal to him. So I started assembling my case. Late nights became data hunts. I dug into internal systems, sourcing every reckless decision Ethan had made. Invoices from that LA agency, communications bypassing compliance, emails boasting about gut instincts over research. I saved every bit of it. But then came the break I didn't expect. A junior accountant, nervous, probably underpaid, sent me a message through our internal Slack. You should see the new supplier contract. Something's not right. He was right. Ethan had pushed through a massive deal with a low-tier supplier based in Southeast Asia for device components. The supplier had a history of missed deadlines and faulty batches. But Ethan ignored procurement concerns and forged ahead. Why? Because the CEO of that supplier was his college roommate. And in the terms of the contract, a 7% marketing advisory fee wired to a third-party account, a shell entity. I cross-checked the name. The entity was partially owned by a trust registered under Ethan Cooper's name. The company wasn't just bleeding money. It was being siphoned. This was more than incompetence. It was fraud. I didn't react. I didn't call him out. I played it cool. Conversation stayed cordial, my tone unchanged. But inside, I was building a war chest. And then one night, after everyone else had gone home, Maria came into my office with a USB drive. This is everything from my side, she said. Technical documentation, proof of ignored warnings, meeting transcripts. You'll know when to use it. I looked at her. You're sure? I asked. I've been sure since the day I watched your father treat you like a ghost, she said. But now I'm done watching this company die. I nodded, tucking the drive away. The walls were closing in on Ethan. He just didn't see them yet. And Richard, blinded by his obsession with legacy, was still defending his favorite son, even as the foundation cracked beneath them both. In the next executive meeting, Ethan arrived late, as usual, sipping a $12 green juice and wearing sunglasses indoors. "Let's keep it short," he yawned. "I've got a branding call with Tokyo tonight." I looked across the table at him. No fury, no jealousy, just one quiet thought pulsing in my mind. You built your throne on a house of glass, and I was already holding the stone. The shareholders began arriving at 9 a.m. sharp. The conference room on the 38th floor was dressed for spectacle. Crystal carafes, polished walnut table, pulse blue lighting washing across the Pulse Nova logo etched into glass. It felt like a coronation, and it was, but not for the man who thought he'd wear the crown. My father stood at the head of the room in his signature navy suit, crisp and calculated, flanked by Ethan, freshly pressed, smug, oblivious. The official agenda was simple: to announce Richard Cooper's retirement and install his youngest son, Ethan, as the new CEO of Pulse Nova Biotech. I sat near the back. No entourage, no speech, just a dossier in my briefcase and 10 years of rage disguised as quiet competence. I glanced at Maria, seated 2 rows up, her expression unreadable but focused. Jonathan Reed entered just behind her, nodding subtly as he took his seat. Every piece was in place. Every name I needed had been contacted, persuaded, aligned. I was done waiting. My father began his speech. After 3 decades of innovation and leadership, he said, "It's time to pass the torch. And there is no better torchbearer than my son, Ethan." Polite applause trickled through the room. Ethan rose with his usual grin, brushing imaginary dust from his lapel like he was stepping onto a stage. He launched into a pre-written statement laced with buzzwords: synergy, disruption, modern healthcare ecosystems. All the right jargon for people who didn't understand product sheets or balance books. I let him finish, and then I stood. Before the motion is carried, I said clearly, "I object." The room fell silent. All eyes turned. My father stiffened, his jaw flexing. Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "You object?" my father said slowly, like he was trying to keep from shouting. "Yes," I replied, "because I have reason to believe this appointment will jeopardize Pulse Nova's future. And I've brought evidence." I walked to the head of the room, placed my dossier on the table, and flipped it open. Over the past 3 years, Ethan Cooper has approved over $18 million in failed campaigns, ignored internal safety reports, and signed supplier contracts laced with personal kickbacks. I clicked the remote. Screens behind me lit up with charts, emails, and spreadsheets. "Here," I said, pointing, "is a vendor invoice with a 7% marketing fee wired to a shell company owned by a trust linked to Ethan Cooper." Ethan's mouth dropped. "That's not." "And here," I continued, louder, "are procurement memos warning against that supplier. Warnings that were ignored." The shareholders leaned forward. My father's face reddened. "Where did you get this?" "From the people who still care about this company," I said coldly. "The people who've kept it running while you handed it to a man who treats it like a toy." "I built this company," he snapped. "And I saved it," I replied. A beat of silence. Then I turned toward the room. "I hold 17% of Pulse Nova's shares," I announced. Jonathan Reed, I nodded toward him, holds 19%. Combined, we have a support of additional shareholders who've seen the damage firsthand. Jonathan stood. "That's correct." A murmur ran through the room. I looked directly at the board. "I propose we vote, now, to remove Richard Cooper as chairman and CEO, and to immediately terminate Ethan Cooper from his role as director of strategy." My father exploded from his seat. "You little bastard. You think you can?" "I know I can," I said, cutting him off. "Because I've done what neither of you ever did. Earn the trust of the people who matter." The board moved quickly. Quiet votes were cast. Secret ballots collected. The tension was electric. Then the company's secretary stood. "The board has voted to remove Mr. Richard Cooper from his positions, effective immediately. Ethan Cooper is also relieved of his duties. By majority, Daniel Cooper is appointed as the new CEO and chairman of Pulse Nova Biotech." The room erupted, some in applause, some in stunned silence. My father looked like he'd been shot. He didn't speak. He didn't argue. He simply gathered his notes, stood slowly, and walked out of the room. Ethan trailed behind him, pale and unsteady, but not before whispering as he passed me. "You'll regret this." I said nothing, because I already had. I had regretted every birthday ignored, every insult swallowed, every slap endured. But not this. This was justice. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the forgotten son. I was the man at the head of the table. The CEO's office was quiet when I stepped inside, too quiet. For years, I dreamed of standing in this exact room, taking the chair behind that massive mahogany desk, overlooking the skyline of Manhattan through floor-to-ceiling windows. This was the throne, the prize, the symbol of everything I had fought for. But as I placed my hands on the polished wood, I felt nothing. No thrill, no euphoria, only stillness. I lowered myself into the chair. It creaked slightly, like it was warning me, "Careful what you wish for." The door behind me remained closed. Maria had insisted I take the rest of the day off after the vote, but I couldn't. I couldn't just leave after everything I had done, everything I had become. The adrenaline was still coiled in my chest. I needed to feel in control. I leaned back and looked around. The walls were lined with shelves, most of them filled with plaques, dusty binders, and photos of my father with presidents, CEOs, and world leaders. Not a single picture of my mother. Not a single sign of the people who built this company in the shadows. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk and found an old bottle of scotch, half empty, no label. Typical. I closed it without a second thought. Then I reached into my briefcase and pulled out something far more valuable, the small wooden box I had carried with me since college. My mother's letters. I opened one. Her handwriting, still smooth and slanted, greeted me like an embrace I hadn't felt in years. "You are not their disappointment. You are my hope." Tears blurred the ink. This office, this building, this company, it was supposed to be redemption. But what I really wanted was her. And she was gone. The next morning, the Pulse Nova headlines hit every major outlet. Cooper legacy dismantled. Daniel Cooper oust father and brother in corporate coup. From bastard son to boardroom savior. New Pulse Nova CEO promises innovation, integrity, and reform. They called it a takeover. They didn't know it was survival. I hit the ground running. First, I appointed Maria as Chief Technology Officer. She deserved more than a title. She deserved freedom to lead. Her team wasted no time. Within a month, we revived the stalled AI diagnostic pipeline and launched beta trials in over a dozen hospitals. I met with shareholders personally. I reassured nervous partners. I canceled half a dozen idiotic campaigns Ethan had greenlit and redirected funds into R&D. We rewrote contracts, streamlined supply chains. For the first time in years, Pulse Nova was breathing. But not everything was so easily repaired. Some senior executives resigned, citing irreconcilable culture shifts. Fine, let them go. Others, mostly those who had watched me get humiliated in silence for years, now wanted to be close. I kept them at arm's length. The strangest part? The calls that didn't come. My father never reached out. Not even once. And Ethan? He vanished. No LinkedIn updates. No Instagram stories. Just silence. I'd stripped them of power, but not of pain. I had won the war, but what was left behind wasn't peace. It was aftermath. At night, I returned to the same modest apartment I had lived in since graduate school. I could have moved into a penthouse, bought a place overlooking Central Park, but something inside me resisted. Maybe I wasn't ready to let go of the struggle. Maybe I didn't know how. Some nights, I stood by the window and looked out over the city, asking myself the question I never voiced aloud. Was it worth it? And every time, I came back to the same image. My mother's face on the day I opened my Harvard acceptance letter. The way her hands trembled. The way she cried. Not because I got in, but because I believe in myself enough to try. I didn't do this for the company, or the title, or the revenge. I did it for the woman who picked me up off the floor when I was a child and whispered, "One day, you'll do great things." Now I had, but I had no one left to share it with. That was the price of my kingdom, and I paid it in full. The first time I saw Pulse Nova Biotech featured on the cover of Forbes, I didn't feel pride. I felt disbelief. The headline read, The man who rebuilt a giant. Daniel Cooper's vision rescues a failing empire. Inside, there were glossy photos of me standing in the innovation lab, shaking hands with hospital executives, overseeing product demonstrations with Maria and her team. The article praised the new leadership, the AI diagnostic breakthroughs, the 5G remote health monitors. Our stock had more than doubled. Orders poured in from Europe, Asia, and South America. We had become the global standard for early-stage cancer detection. And yet, I still rode the subway home most nights, head down, headphones in, dressed like any other tired New Yorker. Not because I couldn't afford better, but because I wasn't sure I wanted to rise so far I forgot the boy who once studied under flickering lights, hiding bruises and questions. Under my leadership, Pulse Nova thrived. We slashed wasteful spending. We built innovation hubs in underfunded communities. Maria's department expanded with unprecedented speed. Our culture shifted from fear and favoritism to experimentation and merit. People no longer whispered about the boss's son in pity or mockery. Now they call me CEO, but I didn't let the title define me. Because if I learned anything in the decade-long war for this company, it was this. Blood means nothing without love. And legacy means nothing without purpose. One Friday evening, well past sunset, I found myself alone in my office again. Not working, just thinking. The city below glittered like a circuit board. Thousands of lives moving, connecting, struggling. I could see my reflection in the window. I didn't look like the frightened boy from years ago, but he was still in there. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the wooden box. The edges were worn now, soft from years of handling. Inside were the letters, my mother's words, preserved like sacred text. I unfolded one I hadn't read in a while. Daniel, when people say you don't belong, it's usually because they see your light and it scares them. Don't let their fear dim what makes you extraordinary. Tears fill my eyes. Again, but this time they weren't heavy. They weren't bitter. They were release. I whispered into the quiet, I did it, Mom. I kept going. I kept your promise. For the first time, I let the silence settle without rushing to fix it. And in that stillness, I made a decision. The next morning, I stood in front of the Pulse Nova staff during an all-hands meeting. Engineers, accountants, janitors, interns, they were all there. I looked around at the faces of people who had built this company behind the scenes for years. People who had never been praised in headlines, but without whom none of this would exist. I want to say something. I began, my voice calm but steady. This company was once ruled by a name. Today, it's run by people. And starting now, 10% of Pulse Nova's net annual profit will be redistributed as employee equity. There was silence. Then, as the words sank in, a low murmur of disbelief. Then applause. Then cheering. Maria wiped her eyes in the front row. It was the first time I'd seen real joy ripple through this company. Not fear, not obligation, joy. That night, I finally moved out of my old apartment. Not to a penthouse, but to a quiet brownstone in Brooklyn, where I could walk to work and past neighborhoods filled with real families. Kids on bikes, couples on benches, mothers with strollers. I didn't want to be a king in a castle. I wanted to be a man who remembered where he came from. I never saw my father again. Ethan resurfaced 2 years later, some tech podcast boasting about his personal brand. He looked tired behind the filters, still chasing shadows, still lost in the echo of a legacy he never earned. And me? I kept working, quietly, steadily, purposefully, because my story wasn't about revenge. It was about becoming the person I was never allowed to be. The lesson I leave behind is simple. Family is not who shares your blood. Family is who believes in your future. And power? It's not given. It's built, one silent, painful, relentless brick at a time. You don't need permission to take your place at the table. You just need to show up long enough to build your own. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or like an outsider in your own family, know this. Your story isn't over. You have the power to write your next chapter, no matter where you came from. Tell us in the comments. What moment in your life made you decide to rise? Like, subscribe, and join us for more true stories of resilience, justice, and redemption. This is Sweet Revenge with Andrew, where every scar tells a story worth hearing.